everyone, and welcome to Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. And Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Can you believe that this is the beginning of the new year, of a new year, a time to refresh, to recommit, to just celebrate and have gratitude for being able to get to this point, to be able to show up as our best selves. And one of the things that we do together here on Dream Leapers is to engage with that energy and with guests who can help us to leap into our dreams, to know that it is possible and worth it to go to whatever that next level is, to be able to live the most fulfilled life possible. And so today, this is backed by popular demand, both because of my team and talking to folks out there who have enjoyed listening to this guest. He is Dimyas Perdue. Let me tell you about him. He is an incredibly distinguished individual whose life has been devoted to leadership, service, and empowering others. He is a seasoned professional with more than 2 decades of experience in military leadership, keynote speaking, and authorship. Dimyas is retired from the United States Marine Corps, where he served for 22 years. He contributed significantly there as the senior enlisted advisor for the Lejeune Leadership Institute, where he impacted more than 185,000 Marine Corps wide. His initiatives, such as the Force Fitness Instructor Program and Marine Leadership Development Program, stand as testament to his leadership skills. He added author to his accolades this year, penning the book Elevation Requires Change, The Journey Towards Purpose and Fulfillment. This is a book you must read. It is a compelling book that offers insights into personal growth and fulfillment. Dimyas has a global reach. It extends to collaborations with international forces, including the Jordanian Armed Forces, Japanese Air Force, and the Philippine Marines, where he has fostered partnerships critical for mission success. We're just happy to have him join us as we think about how we can leap into 2024, taking on whatever leadership skills we need, looking at our own emotional intelligence with our quest for purpose and fulfillment. Yeah, tall order. We're going to talk to him about all of that. Please join me right now in welcoming Dimyas Perdue. Hello.
Thank you. It's good to see you again.
It's so good to be with you. Like I said, we had you and we're like, we need more Dimyas, especially as we begin the year. So Dimyas, at the beginning of a year, people say, oh, I'm making my New Year's resolution. I'm making my commitment. I'm going to do this thing, whatever this thing is. And while I actually think that's a good idea to make a commitment, why do you think it's so hard for people to fulfill them?
I think that's a great question, right? Because people revisit this thing time and time again, but I think it's so hard for people this day and age to fulfill the promises that they made to themselves because they remember that they didn't fulfill it the years prior. And so they are inadvertently, because of their past failures and the times that they gave up, it's like they start the year off, all right, this year, I'm going to do it. But they say it that way because they remember all of the other times they said, this year, new year, new me, new year, new me, new year, new me, right?
Yeah,
so
it's
one of
true.
the hardest things, surface level, like before we even try to dive deep into that, I think there's this thing in the back of their mind that already says that you have the inability to follow through with what you said you would do.
So it's sort of a self-defeating prophecy in a way, like you show up believing that you're going to fail.
Absolutely. They call it that self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah.
Whether you think something positive or negative, you start to unconsciously act in a manner that makes it more likely to occur.
So how do you change that mindset? Because that's pretty fundamental. If we walk into it thinking, oh, maybe I can do it this year, but I never did it before, then we've already pulled the rug out. How do we change? Because the mindset is everything. So if you could change your mindset, then you could probably do anything. How do you change your mindset so that you actually believe that you can and will do whatever you've committed to doing.
Yeah. So I think one of the best things I heard, I'm a big reader, right? I love podcasts
Mhm.
and webinars and all the things like that. But I love Simon Sinek. I love Simon Sinek as a speaker. And one thing that he says that can help people with that mental shift is remembering why you started this thing in the first place.
Mm.
He has a book that says start with why. And
Mhm.
most people don't start with why, they start with the outcome in mind. And they constantly think about the outcome of, I want to lose 20 pounds. So
Mhm.
every day they get up and they start with 20 pounds is a lot. Well,
Right.
'cause the first day it's okay, but then you start thinking 20, you get on that scale after a week and it's only 2 pounds down. And you've been online and they say that you can lose 10 pounds in a week and now you're frustrated.
Right.
But you're constantly thinking about the outcome. But when you start with why being that center of the initial reason why you decided to do it, why do I want to lose 20 pounds? Well, I want to lose 20 pounds because I have a 5-year-old kid that loves to go on walks, but I'm exhausted before when I start.
Mm.
And if you remind yourself of that why, then the outcome that's going to take place. But before you get to the outcome being the what is the 20 pounds, the what is the new job, the what is whatever you said you wanted to do, that's the outcome. But if you remind yourself of what's at the core belief, right, that why, the next portion you can focus on is the systems and the processes, which is the how. But people don't go about it that way, Harry.
Mm.
People don't go about it that way. They constantly think about the outcome and they're defeated because it seems like it's so far beyond them. But if they can remind themselves of why they want to do it in the first place, find that root of it, and then focus on the systems and the processes, it makes it easier to get to that 20 pounds, or it makes it easier to fix the relationship.
I think that's a really great point. I have a friend who, a big guy, definitely with a lot more weight on his body than I'm sure is recommended. And he suffered a couple of health challenges. And I think at first he wasn't looking at the why. The doctor said, you better lose this weight, right? And then, so he gained it back, of course. He lost some and he gained it back. This time, having had a major health setback, he said, wait a minute. The why is because I want to live, because
Yes.
I want to be able to walk around. I want, I'm blessed to have survived this health crisis.
Right.
And do I want to have yet another
Yeah.
reminder? No. And so I've talked to him recently, says, I'm down 20 pounds.
Look at
I'm
that.
down 30 pounds. I'm continuing to go down. I'm going to the gym every day. He wasn't able to do it before. And I think that what you're saying, as I listen to him, because
Mhm.
I'm just listening and being as supportive as possible. And what I have heard is he's got that why at the top of the list. Why? Because I
Absolutely.
want to live.
Yes. Because I want to live.
I
Not,
want to
I don't want
live.
to just survive. I want to thrive in this thing, right?
Yeah.
You see many people go and walk in the hospital. You'll see many people that are surviving,
Mhm.
but they're not thriving. And you see it when you go to the airport. You see it everywhere you go. We don't make this one vessel that gives us the ability to be able to do whatever it is we want to do. We don't make it priority, right?
Mhm.
And that's why so many people, when the new year starts, they focus on this thing because they realize this is the mechanism that allows me to do those things.
Yeah. I think it will be helpful to talk about some of the challenges that people have as we just did, but here's another one. I was with, some folks during the Christmas holiday, and one young woman who was, starting a family, new marriage, really building her life as a young person in the next phase.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she shared with me is that she has a lot of doubts, which I think we all do, but especially, starting out. And part of the doubts have come from negative things that have been said to her by family members, including a parent. Negative things that are not supportive, that are not uplifting, more like you won't amount to anything, you're no good, that kind of thing. That is very hurtful,
Yeah.
for anybody who's had that experience. I'm so sorry that it happened because it does make a huge difference to have your parents in particular, having your back. But Demise, what kind of advice can we give to someone who has that negative voice in their head as they're working to build a life, but that it's there say, you're not going to amount to anything. How do we release from that?
Yeah, I have to acknowledge the fact that it is extremely difficult when it comes from someone close to you. When it comes from a mother or a father or a spouse, and they tell you that they don't believe in your idea, or they don't believe that you, of all people, have the capacity to do that, it hurts.
Yes.
Right. So we have to acknowledge that, it would be wrong for me not to. And because it hurts so much, there's a level of belief that we have, like maybe they're right. Maybe they're
Mm,
right, because who knows me better than me other than the person that raised me? They've
right.
seen me. Maybe they've seen me fall short 1, 2, or 10 times before. Maybe they've seen that take place. And now that's one thing it could be. But then the other thing that I find, and I even talk about this in the book, the other thing I find is because of their personal failures, the things that they haven't done in their lives, and because they didn't reach their full potential, they put that off on you.
Mm,
And they create this doubt. They create this fear in you for being able to go and take the next steps. And they created, fear. I talk about it as an acronym, FEAR, false expectations appearing real, but
hmm
they're not. They set these things for us, and we begin to believe it when it's reinforced. We begin to believe it. And, I know I say this a lot, but it's all about changing that narrative, because there is no one responsible for the way we feel but us. Psychology shows that there can be so many inputs into us, so many influences, but we are personally responsible with what we do with that information. We are responsible if we receive it and we own it and make it a part of us, or if we receive it as a data input and say, you know what, I appreciate you feeling this way, but I've got greater works to do. Because this is your opinion of me and what I'm
mm.
capable of, but I know what I'm purposed to do, and I have to do this despite what you're saying. And so if we can rid our minds of the outside talk that's influencing our self-talk, that would be the number one way that I would say that we can get started with that.
Which, as you say, is much easier said than done, especially if it's a loved one, someone who you are close to, or at least even if it's close by blood to, right? It can be really difficult to do. In order to free yourself, do you surround yourself with other people? Do you, what spiritual exercises do you do? Like, what can you actually do in order to have that impact of freeing yourself from that other person's grasp?
Yeah, the first question I would ask is, are you really stuck?
Mm,
We talk about being free, right? We talk about being free, but are you really stuck? Many people are psychologically chained.
mm,
And what needs to happen is we need to break that. I call it, I talk about two things, right? In India, when young elephants are being trained to do shows and to walk around, elephants are really big there. When they're being trained, they're trained as when they're young, and they put chains on their feet and they tie them to what's known as banyan trees. These are the strongest
right.
trees there. They tie them to these banyan trees, and when the elephants are young, they try to walk away, and eventually they get to the point where they don't even try to get away anymore because they realize they've been held back for so long.
Mm,
And then they can take them away from that chain, and they can literally connect them to a small stick in the ground. And the minute they feel any form of resistance, they're reminded of being stuck, and they stay. But are you really stuck? And then the other portion that I talk about is dogs with perimeter collars. I like to go on runs. And when I'm running in my neighborhood, whenever I see the dogs with these perimeter collars, yards protected by
sure.
invisible fence, I don't ever believe it, because I'm like, I don't see this fence. The dog doesn't see this fence. And I know he's got this collar on him. But the reality is, if that dog breaks through that invisible fence, the shock will last for a bit, but eventually the signal fades and the shock is no longer there.
Mm,
So what my recommendation would be for those people is, first, are you really stuck? Or is it that small stick in the ground that you've just been trained to keep you in place? And then the second thing is this invisible fence, this psychological barrier that's been created by people or created by yourself. If you could just push through that point of pain, that initial shock of breaking through where you're told not to go and what you can't
Mhm.
do, if you can just bear that little bit of pain, you will truly be free.
That's powerful. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. I am so honored today. We are talking to Dimyas Perdue. He's just given us pouring some wisdom and some love into us as we move into this new year. Because honestly, that's really what we need. We need love more than anything. That is what helps us. That's the fuel. That's the fuel, and wisdom as well. You know, I was taught early on when I started my business, which is many, many years ago, a person who was an expert in business development said to me, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. Surround yourself with people who are better and expert at the things that you aren't good at
Yeah.
so that you can become good at those things. And I think that that advice is good for life. Surround yourself with people who are great, who are smart, who are capable, who are shining examples of goodness. And when you do that, in those tender moments, you turn and there's a bright light right there, and boy, doesn't that make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you say that, because most people, um, their circle of influence is not their ideal circle.
That's
Yet
right.
they stay there and they don't go and search for it. I had a good friend of mine reach out to me and he's like, you always hear that. Surround yourself with people doing better than you. Get yourself an alliance and work with them. He said, but what do I do when there's nobody around and I seem like I'm that person? And I was like, wow, man, that's a really good question. I haven't had that one. I was like, well, first and foremost, if you find yourself being that person, then why don't you create that community? That was the first thing I told him,
Mm.
because you maybe you have this gift, but when you don't have that alliance, when you don't have those mentors, do you know how many books that have been written about the thing that you love?
Mm.
We have the world at our fingertips, but so many of us care more about looking at the distracting things rather than things that can educate us and put us where we need to be. We would rather be entertained with our circle than educated with our circle. And it typically takes negative events to get people to say, yes, I'm ready to find somebody to get me on track. But I wish it didn't take that. I wish
Yeah.
it didn't take a December 31st for people to say that I need to do things a little bit differently. Imagine where we would be as a society if everybody treated every day like December 31st and I'm going to do better
Mm.
tomorrow.
I love that idea. If everybody
Imagine,
treated every day like December 31st, yes, because we believe somehow that it's really important
yeah,
to evaluate and put our best foot forward, right? And shouldn't it be that every day? I remember my grandmother who lived to be 101 years old,
oh, wow,
and she would say, every day that you wake up, it's a blessing. And if
absolutely.
you consider it a blessing every day, you get up with a smile on your face
Mhm.
and you determine what good you're going to do in that day and start with you. Another thing, just on this, so I'm often talking to Myas about the wisdom of my family, my mother in particular, who is now 94 years old and still, holding it down and
Yeah,
being the amazing matriarch. One of her greatest lessons eh, has been keep good company.
yes.
And I often reflect on that. I often talk about that in my coaching sessions as well as through Dream Leapers. And, you know, when I wrote a book called How to Be some years ago, actually 25 years ago, we figured it out. And this was when, if I have it right, this was probably around the time that you were starting in the military. Was that about 25 years ago?
2000 is when I came in, so roughly 23 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
So the Gulf War was happening.
yeah,
It was just happening then, beginning. And I remember, and this is an etiquette book, so hear me out. I'm writing this book and all this stuff is going on. You know, there's literally, it's an incendiary time in the world. and people are pointing their fingers at the government, at the president, at this one and that one, at different cultures, and it's all their fault. And I remember meditating on this and thinking, what's our role in this? What is our role as individuals? Not as members of the military like you were, as government officials, but just as individuals in our lives every day. And what it made me realize, Dimyas, is we create wars every day in our lives. When we are not keeping good company, when we are not doing what we know is the better thing to do, when we are not making choices that will support and uplift. For example, when we pick up the phone and start complaining about people in our lives who, it could be our spouse, it could be our boss, whoever it is, our kids, rather than addressing what the situation is. And when we do that, just that example, if I pick up the phone and start complaining about my spouse to whoever, those people I talk to, even if they promise not to say anything, they can't keep that promise. So they tell at least one other person. And then could be a couple weeks, couple months later, we all see each other. I'm not mad anymore, but they're still mad.
Right.
Because I lit a fire, right? I lit a fire.
Of course.
The fire has grown. Suddenly, the fire is so big that it is uncontrollable. It's like the forest fires in California, right? That is our own war. That is our own. You don't have to go to another part of the world. Look at your own world. And so I'm curious for you, as having been in the military for so many years, having been in active combat, and then being in your life as just a human being in your life, what have you learned about war as it relates to human dynamics?
Yeah, I think that's a phenomenal question. There's a few things that you mentioned right then. When we talk about war and the human dynamics, the first thing is we're human beings, and naturally we don't want that conflict. We don't want conflict, but when conflict arises, you have to know how to war. You have to know how to be a warrior. And one of the definitions of warrior is of, engaged in, or pertaining to war. And whether it's a war with the mind, a war in a relationship, I love how you talked about that from the standpoint of you giving information, that information being relayed, and it was a major thing for you in the moment.
Right.
But now it died down and somebody else stirred this thing up, and now they're coming in because they're your supporting fires.
Right.
They're your supporting fires, and you told them, but you also didn't tell them that the war was over.
Right. We never do that. We don't say the war is over. Right.
The war is over. So you call them during these bad times, but you don't talk to them as much during the good times, and that's important to do. Because what happens with war, we call it, there are a few things. One is the fog of war, when it's not clear. It's a figurative thing, but it's a literal thing as well. And if you picture fog of war, you picture fog in general, it is so difficult to be able to see in fog. And many times by us making these phone calls to tell everybody, and then they're making phone calls, we're just creating more fog in the situations. And it's very difficult to drive in fog. It's even more difficult to fight in fog because you have to be careful about where you're firing. Because when you fire, you want to ensure that you hit your intended target. And the first thing I would say with that is making sure that you align your impact with your intent. What are you really trying to do in this situation by conveying this message to your friend? Are you looking for her or him to solve something? Because if you're looking for him to solve it, then you need to be talking to somebody that's a real mentor, right? Somebody that's experienced in this type of war, somebody that's experienced in conflict resolution.
Right.
Because if you're talking to your fireball friend, that's the one that'll take her earrings off,
right?
Right when you make the phone call, that's
Girl.
Right. Because she's still on fire when you come back. And so there are a few other things that happen when we talk about the human dynamics, because there's friction and there's uncertainty. And many times in our lives, we cause that friction by doing things like that, because yes, I wanted to communicate. I wanted to get this off my chest, but maybe I didn't do it to the right person. I looked left to my friend and I looked right to this friend and I picked up the phone that I called, but I never looked up and sought the one who can give me the true counsel. And the problem is we as human beings, human dynamics, when we're warring, we want something to provide us with comfort immediately. And the only way we get that immediate comfort is by words of affirmation coming from other people. Yeah, you're right. He's wrong. You're right. She's wrong. That's what we look for. And we're looking in the wrong direction to be able to receive the proper guidance because we want the answer right now. Where in war, everything is not right now. We have a saying that says no plan survives the first shots of combat. You can go in saying that this is what I want to do. This is how this situation is going to be. But the minute you fire that first round, things change. When people get hurt, things change. When lives are lost, things change. And that same thing happens in a relationship. I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell my bride tonight, you know what, we need to talk. Because I'm going to tell her she hasn't done this, she hasn't done this, and she hasn't done this. We're going to war. And when I walk in, I say everything I have to say. And she said, you're right. That just changed the dynamic of war, right? Instantly, right? But it could be completely different if I went in with a way and now she's tearing me back up. Well, you did this and you did that. So the fog of war is created by different things, but then there's levels of fear and then there's uncertainty. That human dynamic of uncertainty is what really makes warring with any situation difficult because we don't know what the outcome is going to be. And we don't know how the opposing forces, loved ones, friends, coworkers, supervisors, we don't know what their reactions are going to be and how it will affect us. So that level of uncertainty is what makes warring truly difficult.
And so how do you deal with uncertainty? I mean, it's a part of life. You cannot be certain about most things. I mean, you can have faith.
Yeah.
You can have planning. So you have a sense of what normally happens in a particular situation. But how do we handle uncertainty?
Yeah. You need to develop emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, we call TTPs, techniques, tactics, and procedures. What are your emotional, physical, spiritual TTPs? What techniques do you do to gain control of your emotions in these situations? What tactics will you use when you go into the conversation? What procedures have worked for you in the past that you can possibly implement right now? Who are you? So how would I go about this? I would say, who am I when I'm at my worst?
Okay.
Who am I when I'm at my worst? What could I do to be better when I'm angry? Write down a technique, write down what your tactic will be, and identify what my new procedure is when I go into the situation. And you have to identify these TTPs with every situation so you can gain control. Don't allow yourself to be mentally hijacked. If you allow yourself to be mentally and emotionally hijacked, you lose all control, right? So, of course, I teach emotional intelligence, right? So
yes.
let's nerd out for a little bit.
Okay, good. Yeah, we need an example.
Let's nerd out for a little bit. When we receive any type of stimulus, right?
Yeah.
We receive it at the base of our brain. So when we stub that toe in the middle of the night, let's just use that one because everybody in the world has done that at least once.
Yeah.
The first thing you're thinking in that moment, we're going to say what most people think, right? But the first thing you think is using what's known as the limbic system. The limbic system is where your emotions lived. So there was a stimulus, I stubbed my toe, my emotions say I'm about to die, right? The reality is it's not. But when I jump up, I grab my toe and I continue to wait for a second, I then go to rational thinking, it's okay. Now that's a very surface level explanation, right?
Sure.
Let's take I-95 in Virginia at 4:00 in the afternoon when traffic is insane and we're jam-packed and everybody's frustrated with work and the guy behind me is just laying on the horn. That's the stimulus. I'm in an emotional moment right now saying I'm a United States Marine. I am 208 pounds. I don't mind a good fight. All right. That's me thinking emotionally. And if I operate during the limbic system, I'm operating in a moment where it can only be an emotional response. That's being emotionally hijacked. And that's why we get in trouble. But if we can allow ourselves to do what I like to call the traffic light model. When I know I am in a heightened emotional state, I need to consider the traffic lights. I shouldn't be on go. I shouldn't be on green. I need to either A, yellow light it because I'm familiar with this situation and I can just slow down to allow it to go to rational thinking, or B, because my temper is where it is right now, I need to red light it and stop completely because if I act, it will be an irrational behavior.
Mm.
So by doing that, you allow the processes to be able to work in your favor. So it goes from stimulus to limbic system to rational thinking, prefrontal cortex, where we're fully developed. That's where we assign meaning to the situation. And when you allow yourself to pause and assign meaning to it, that's how you gain control of any situation.
Ooh, I hope y'all heard that. That's excellent. And it takes like a pause. It takes a breath. It takes really stopping for a moment to allow yourself to go through that process. Is that right, Dimyas?
Absolutely. I have a friend I shared that same thing with recently. And I told her, I said, I mentioned the traffic light to her. She called me back after about a week. She said, I've been telling myself when the situation happens, pause. She says, I tell myself, I say it out loud, pause. And that gives her the time to assign meaning to the situation. Because if you don't, you're emotionally hijacked and you will say what you are feeling in the moment. And we know that's typically never good when
That
we're
is
not experienced.
often not good. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are here with Dimyas Perdue, who is the author of Elevation Requires Change. And we're talking about change right now, the changes that we can make in attitude, behavior, and outcome when we're paying attention. So I hope all of you are paying attention. I want to talk about your book, Elevation Requires Change. So I think just even with the title, we all want to be elevated. We all want to get to the next level. We
Yes.
want to rise up. Requires change.
Yeah.
Nobody likes change. Not
Nobody.
really, because it's uncertain. It's back to the
Yeah.
uncertainty concept. Like, well, okay, I'm familiar with this, whatever this is. I'm familiar with my life as it is.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me in order to elevate, I have to change. I
Absolutely.
think I'm kind of afraid of that, Dimyas. So what does elevation requires change mean? What do you share in your book, and how can I get comfortable with this idea?
Yeah. One of the first things that's funny about the title of that book is because when you talk about change with most people, like, hey, there are going to be some changes around here. Who wants change? You'll see countless hands going up. There's actually a little cartoon picture about this. Who wants change? Hands go up. And it says, who wants to change? And hands come down. And people rarely want change. They want the benefits of what change brings. And so in the process of elevating, I give many stories about what happens as you elevate and what's required of you. For skydivers, the higher they go up, the more tools they need to be able to sustain them at that level. If you were to go hike a mountain, I hiked Mount Fuji years ago, and I remember as I was hiking up the mountain, peak condition, feeling great. You know, again, I'm in the Marine Corps, no big deal for me to go on a hike. But as we started getting closer to the top, my breathing pattern started to be a lot different. It was more labored, and it was because of the altitude. I wasn't used to operating at altitude, and because of that, I was shallow breathing. My heart rate was extremely elevated because I was not used to operating at that level. But the change that was required for me to continue to move on is I needed to slow down to be able to embrace what was happening in the environment. But most people don't want to do that because, again, the minute we're met with adversity, we want to stop. That could have easily become, because it could have easily became a perimeter collar for me. And I could have stopped and said, you know what, the view is good enough here.
Right.
And let me just go ahead and go back. But something needed to change for me to elevate to get to the top of Mount Fuji, to get my little stick to say that I made it to the top. But most people don't want to do that. We want the quick route because you could also take the train. You can take the train to get to the top and not do it. You can ride in a vehicle and just watch it navigate all the way up. But most people don't want to take the stairs on the way. And what I encourage people to do in the book is to see the beauty in taking the stairs, because there are things that have to happen. I relate it to an elevator when I talk in the book, and I say that Floor 12 is where success is. Floor 12 is where the ideal marriage is. Floor 12 is the property that you've always wanted. Floor 12 is the business that you wanted to start, and it's there. But when you get on the elevator, you're ready to go, and you press your button and it starts to go up, but it gets to floor 2 and somebody gets on. And 2 more people get on. And now they're pressing 7, they're pressing 9, and they're pressing 11. And now you have more stops along the way. And most people get frustrated with this process because all they care about is getting to their destination. But the reality is, the fact that everybody came on here might be beneficial for you because there are certain stops that you might need to make along the way of elevation. When we look at it from a real sense, we want to get to floor 12 to be able to operate in the capacity of a CEO, but we've never worked for anyone and we've got no interpersonal communication skills. We want to be able to go and do so many different things, but we don't appreciate how to manage our emotions. We don't know how to manage finances, but we want to own a business. We want employees, but we've never done payroll before. So there's so many different things, so many steps that you have to hit along the way that people don't want to do. And what I do in the book is I talk to them about taking care of you first. Before you can lead anyone, before you can run the business, before you can do anything of excellence, you need to first take care of you. I have to take care of Dimyas first in order to be able to elevate. And until I appreciate what change is able to bring, it's absolutely nothing that will work in my favor.
I think that is very practical, and you know, it made me think, Dimyas, of someone who I think is a good example at this moment. A friend of mine about a year ago had a stroke. And he had been a runner. He had taken a lot of time and effort to kind of turn his life around. And still, this happened to him. And in his recovery, one of the things that he has done is to give himself like the Mount Fuji goal. So he had been a runner. He had run every day for more than 400 days. Like he was, if only a mile a day, at least that. As soon as he could run again, he started, and then he gave himself the goal of the New York City Marathon. Because he was going to do that before, I'm going to run the marathon. And a number of us were like, hey, is that too much? Did you ask your doctor? Are you sure you can, all the questions? The marathon, you just came out the hospital, boy. And I talked to him about it. He ran the marathon after a few months after coming out of the hospital. And then he ran it again this summer. And what he said to me is, I had to have these goals, like your Mount Fuji. I had to have giant goals in order to push past all of the challenges of recovery. There were so many things. There continue to be so many things that this relatively young man has had to go through in order to heal his body and his spirit.
Yeah.
But having these outsized goals helped him. What do you think about that? About setting the big goals, especially if there's a lot of challenge before you?
Yeah, I believe it's necessary. Mm-hmm. I believe it's necessary for you to set that goal, and it needs to be crazy. It needs to be crazy because when you set a goal that's very easily, you get to that point, and then okay, I made it. Now what?
Right.
Now what? So it took you a week to do what you said you wanted to do. Why did you even set that goal? Set something so lofty, so crazy that it becomes this crazy success mountain that's waiting for you to climb it, right? And in order for you to be able to climb it, in order for him to be able to run 26.2 miles for the marathon, he had to be able to run the 13.1, which was the half mile.
Right.
Was the half marathon. So there are checkpoints along the way. So set that crazy goal and then establish checkpoints for you to be able to go along the way. Because we set these goals, right? And some people set the crazy goal, but then they set the crazy goal, but then they keep the anchor attached to them. And it makes it so hard for them to be able to do it. And I'm talking about the anchor, like a ship's anchor. So it's weighing them down and preventing them from going. Set the goal and remove the anchor. Earlier, we talked about the family, right? You can't do it. Set the goal, remove the anchor. I want to lose the 20 pounds. Set the goal, but remove the anchor. Too many people set these goals and they see it, but they fail to remove the anchor. It's time to roll that thing up, identify what your lighthouse is, and keep pushing towards that.
And so I mentioned to you as it relates to my friend, and I was certainly not the only one who said, "Are you sure? Is that safe?" And
Yeah.
now, of course, it was important for him to check in with his doctor,
Mhm.
but there are plenty of people going to be naysayers who are
Yeah.
going to say, "Boy, what? Sure, you're going to do the
Right.
marathon. Sure, you're going to climb Mount Fuji. Sure, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Sure, you know." Call me back when you're being realistic.
Right.
There are always people, even people who love you, who mean well, who can throw that anchor at you, throw something at you that could knock you down.
Yeah.
What tools can you use to not be sidetracked, to not lose the air in the balloon when the people around you are not necessarily as supportive as you would like for them to be?
Yeah. When you make the decision to start running the race, put the blinders on.
Hmm.
When you make that decision to run that race, tell whoever you want to tell. Because sometimes it's good to have the naysayers. It can serve as motivation for you,
Okay.
right? So whether you tell them or not, when you start to run the race, put the blinders on. The Kentucky Derby, most famous race, right?
Yep.
If you look at those horses have what they have blinders on the side. They don't look left and they're not looking right. And the reason why they have it like that is because horses are easily distracted.
Hmm.
They're easily distracted, they're easily startled. And when you put the blinders on, they can only see that goal. They can only see where they're supposed to go. I can hear things. It's one thing to hear it, but it's another thing for me to turn my gaze towards it and allow it to get my attention. So if I keep my eyes stayed on my goal and I put my blinders on and I know who has control of the reins, then it's easy for me to continue to go despite the naysayers on the side. As
That is so important, Dimyas. I wanna dig a little deeper on this one because well, first of all, explaining what blinders are for, I think is helpful because we hear this saying, we know, but, like, what do they actually do? I think that was really helpful. But also, what needs blinders today? Social media, binge watching TV,
absolutely,
what I mean, right?
absolutely. Imagine looking at everything you did as you actually planting a seed. Imagine if you just, I mean, you look at that. If everything you did, you planted a seed, and every time you revisited that activity, you watered it. What does your life garden look like?
Ooh.
At the at, we're in the, at the we're at the, it's New Year time frame, right. What does your go everything you planted in 2023, everything you watched, listened to, every conversation that you had, every person that you entertained, every time you overate, everything you did, you planted it. Now you're looking back at this harvest. Are you pleased with what you planted all year?
Ooh.
And if you're not pleased with everything, it's time to go through, retill, and recultivate this land. Get rid of everything that is not ideal for you. And be careful about everything you plant. You cover that seed and you water that seed and you nurture that seed so that at the end of 2024, your harvest looks different than it looked in 2023. Because if you don't, here's what you got to remember. You might not get rid of everything. You might not get rid of everything. You may start planting this good stuff, but then that phone call comes in and say, "Hey girl, how you been?"
Yeah.
But that was the one weed that you knew was your weakness, right? And it's now time for you to extract that thing right then and there, because if not, it's going to be so much easier for you to go back to planting those seeds that kept you, that held you back, those seeds that became your anchor, those seeds that kept you from setting that goal, those seeds that kept you from putting on the blinders, the seeds that kept you from establishing that mountaintop that you wanted to climb. What if you looked at it and everything you planted was right in front of you right now? What does it look like?
Ooh, that is an exercise that I'm gonna say is probably scary for a lot of people, but a really smart, conscious exercise
Yeah.
to take. And then if you realize, "Ooh, a lot of weeds in my garden. I can't even breathe because there's so much stuff in there that doesn't belong there," then you have to take the time to do that weeding. Let me remind folks, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are talking with Dimyas Perdue. He is dropping wisdom all over the place right here. We've just got a few minutes left, but yes, Dimyas is the author of Elevation Requires Change. You want to read his book. It's got a lot of very practical, helpful information on how you can navigate your life more consciously, paying close attention to the choices that you make and the path that you want to take forward. Dimyas, we have just a few minutes left. I want to talk about this weeding process because, I'm a big believer in making lists. I was taught years ago, review your day at the end of the day and then make your plan at night so that when you wake up, you're executing your plan. So it's a constant plan and review. If you are doing this review of the seeds that you planted and watered last year, and you realize there's a lot of weeds up in there, what would be the recommendation that you would give on how you can be disciplined about weeding that garden and then replanting a better garden?
And this is where you have to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you do this review and you get in that field and you start to pluck through the weeds, there are so many things that you may be attached to that you just don't want to get rid of. That's me when I go in my garage saying I'm going to declutter. I've got photos pictures that my kids drew when they were in the 3rd grade, and my oldest son is 20 years old. I don't know why I still need this, but it means something to me, right? I don't want to get rid of it. I've become a hoarder of these things. And so when people go back and they're looking in this garden, or they're looking in this field, and they've got attachment to some of these things, and even though they don't need it, they may not necessarily want to get rid of it. And then there are the things that they know they want to get rid of, and that's easy. But if none of this is really serving me, then sometimes it just might be ideal for me to set it ablaze.
Mm-hmm.
Because you mentioned the California fires earlier. And
I did.
One thing that is beautiful about fire is that once it goes through and burns everything, when it grows back, it is so much better. Set it ablaze.
Wow.
Set it ablaze. That way, you know for a fact, everything that is not for you has been scorched. And now you have control on what you're planning next.
Mm.
If it hasn't worked for you by now, let's not even go back trying to uproot it. It's easy to pull weeds when we got a small garden. But if you know that your world for 40 years, 50 years has not been that, set it ablaze and start fresh. That's what I would do.
Which is a whole lot easier said than done, Dimyas. But if you want your life to be different, you are the person who has to make it different. I mean, that is really the point here. And
let me jump back in there, Harry.
Please.
We use this saying, and we say a lot easier said than done.
Yes.
Although that's factual, we have to listen to the type of language that is.
Mm.
Easier said than done tells me that I'm doing something difficult. Easier said than done. I'm telling myself that this process will be difficult. Easier said than done doesn't mean that it hasn't been done. That means I can do it.
Right.
And so instead of me trying to set everything ablaze, right? I'm just going to pour some gasoline right over here, and I'm just going to walk with this. Right? I'm just going to walk with it. And as it arrives, you know what? Here's what I did with my social media. I was big in the bodybuilding community. I did 9 bodybuilding shows back in the day. That sounds old, right? But back in my day, I did bodybuilding shows. It wasn't that long ago, right? But what I did with my social media, I went through and I just clicked and I deleted one. And I said, today I'm just going to delete one. And I just deleted another. And I said, every time I go on social media, on Instagram, I'm going to delete a page that does not serve me.
Oh, okay.
Small, manageable chunks. But I'm still setting the fire.
I'm glad you gave that as an example, because people examples are helpful. setting the fire. We don't want it to be uncontrollable. It is
Right.
controlled. It is controlled. This is, I'm going to address this one. I'll
Yes.
delete that. I'm going to address this one. I'll delete that. That is even your point about having on blinders.
Right.
With the blinders, this has to go. With the blinders, this has to go. That's incredibly helpful. I knew it was going to be perfect to talk to you, Dimyas. I can't even believe our time is up. You see how fast it went?
That's
It's
quick.
it's so quick. How can people find you if they'd like to learn more about the work that you do? Where do they go?
Yes, I can be. You can go to my website at PerdueLeadership.com. My Instagram is _Dimyas_Perdue. That's my IG handle, or just Dimyas Perdue on Facebook.
Well, thank you for starting this year out with us so well. I so appreciate you. I'm inspired. I bet everybody who's connected to us is inspired too. And I look forward to talking to you again this year.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Harriette.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in to this beginning of the year episode of Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.